Exploration videos. The top 3 things to expect when watching these videos are buildings in odd locations, a sense of loneliness or abandonment, and a person who's either reckless or brave who chooses to document the unknown for a fun little video. You never know what's around the corner, and there's a high chance the explorer will stumble across something unusual or something dangerous. Speaking of which, the subject of today's video will be the channel Briscoe Park, specifically their collection of tapes with interesting content and fascinating descriptions. This includes the description of the channel itself. Don't ask, just watch. Which is what I hope you'll do as I explain the events of the series while also pointing out the odd things I've noticed. And trust me, there's a lot of odd things that can be noticed, from glowing eyes staring at you from afar to the odd noises that can be heard in each location. Additionally, the ambience is insane and the feeling of isolation is suffocating. However, when watching the videos, you just can't stop, because you desperately want answers and the curiosity to see more is overwhelming. Links are in the description as always, which I highly recommend watching the series first because the experience is wild. And if you already watched it and you want to listen to my recap and theories, then sit back, relax, maybe get a snack, and as always, my name is Estrella. Let's explore. The tapes. The introduction to the series is tape 4 Barrels, in which we see an open field with an abandoned building off into the distance and a red moon high in the sky. The cameraman then explores inside the building, which clearly is in ruin, with random animals that took shelter inside, and there was in fact a barrel. And in the end of the video, the cameraman walks away from the building. However, before continuing, turning to the description, it reads, Submission statement, barrel mostly contained, minor disturbances detected, follow-up not required. This text likely implies that the barrel we saw is probably being contained in the building, and as for the minor disturbances, it could be referring to the animals or the strange footsteps that I don't think came from the cameraman. Anyways, we also see a collection of numbers and letters in the video that can be linked to a CIA document with the header, Is ours only one of 3 universes? There's also something about a specific project, however, that's a lot of complicated stuff that I won't get into at the moment. So the cameraman. I believe the cameraman is likely some type of secret agent or researcher. The description is straight to the point and probably simple yet informative to whoever is meant to receive this report. As for who the cameraman is working for and why these locations need to be documented, that's to be determined. Now moving on, tape 5 Windows. In this video, there's a lot more buildings which, just like in the last one, they appear abandoned or in ruin. The cameraman explores one of these distant homes, and oddly enough, some of the windows in the homes appear completely pitch black, which could just be because it's night outside, but regardless, the most noteworthy thing from this video is this right here. 2 dots which could represent eyeballs that are peeking from the windows. This is especially interesting when you look at the description. Submission statement, after further review, I was being watched. Follow-up not required, which could imply that something is stalking our cameraman, and it's likely whatever was at the window. How ominous. Next up, tape 6, which is exploring an abandoned church building, and inside were old photos hanging on the walls, but abruptly the footage cuts away to the cameraman running, and for a split second we see a pale figure sitting and a pale figure watching from the windows. Again, this was brief, and later we see footage of a cross before the video ends with a still image of the church building, and as for the description, it reads, Submission statement, minor visuals and auditory disturbances. Follow-up may be required. I believe the reason why this requires a follow-up unlike the last location is because there's a lot more of a noticeable entity that isn't just 2 dots staring from a window. We see a physical body, so this means it requires more attention, at least I assume. Anyways, tape 7. There's another abandoned building that the cameraman goes on to investigate, but the cameraman soon walks into the field, and I believe they also crouch in the grass for a moment until the video ends. As for the description, it reads, Submission statement, no disturbances detected beyond last distance documented. Oh, and by the way, we see a familiar stalking friend, which is a pair of dots watching the cameraman. How nice. Next video, tape 8, which opens in a cornfield. The cameraman seemingly wanders aimlessly and even runs before arriving at an old abandoned building. They explore inside for a bit before leaving the location to find another building, which might be a church with a gate. Speaking of which, I believe something slammed hard into the gate. However, whatever it wasn't caught on camera, and as for the description, it reads, Submission statement, visual disturbances detected, cornfield. Either there's an entity or it's a cornfield labyrinth that's a trick of the mind. Maybe. Regardless, next video, tape 9. The cameraman wanders in the forest and we see a familiar pair of bright dots before they hide away as the cameraman approaches. The cameraman then records a view of the lake in which a rock was skipped on the water, and far in the distance we see another pair of bright dots stalking them. Those eyes continue to follow the cameraman as they explore the area, and at some point the cameraman finds themselves on a long bridge. Luckily nothing bad happens, however behind them could be heard a scream or a roar, which provoked them to start running, and whatever that thing was, it doesn't exactly sound human. Regardless, the cameraman found a building which doesn't look abandoned or in ruined. It's clean, full of furniture, and there's even a fire. This home must be owned by someone, but by who is the question, since the cameraman didn't stumble across another person. Speaking of which, as the cameraman explores the building, noises could sometimes be heard all around around them, which made it seem like someone should be there, but again, it was empty. Eventually, the cameraman sees a rocking chair which was moving on its own, and this provoked them to leave. As for the description, it reads, submission statement, visual disturbances detected, attempted to make contact, follow-up not required. I'm assuming this is referring to the stalker with the bright eyes. It has been following the cameraman since the beginning, and it might have been the thing that skipped the rock towards them when they were recording the lake. I wonder what it wants. But moving on to tape 10, it's raining in the forest and the cameraman notices eyes watching them from the distance. The cameraman doesn't seem alarmed by this and even started to approach the eyes before they vanished. A bird soon spooked the cameraman, and later they explored the area where they found sheep until eventually they spotted a miniature structure, which I initially assumed was a building off into the distance, but it isn't? It's a little weird. As for the description, it reads, submission statement, followed and watched, attempted to make contact, but subject leaves. This is especially fascinating because it means whoever this person is documenting these videos, they're willing to make contact with this ominous stalker entity, and they aren't afraid. Why and what they'll get out of this? No idea. Next up, tape 11. We see a handful of environments and even see adorable sheep. To describe the locations, they're odd, very sharp and hilly with random plant life. There's even this location with stones that almost look like a ritual could be performed there. I don't know. We also see the eyes again before revealing a bridge that leads to a huge stone building or castle. The cameraman explores the location before the video ends, and as for the description, it reads, submission statement, stone in perfect alignment. Hearing was limited in the forest. Follow-up may be required. Since a follow-up is required, clearly something is important about this video, and my initial guess is those strange stones that I believe are a setup for a ritual. Maybe it can be used for something like an anchor point / location? That's just an assumption though, and I'm not really sure. It's literally just a bunch of stones spiraling in a circle with one in the middle. As for the stone castle, I will admit it's fantastical, but I'm not sure if that's what it's referring to. Next up, tape 12. First we see a field of flowers, then a flock of sheep, a tall and unusual structure that's hollow, cottages, a path with tall hedges, and another tall structure. As for the description, it reads, submission statement, no disturbances, nothing following. Quick pause, it could be a coincidence, but at this point I can see a trend with sheep appearing in these videos, and according to Google, sheep can symbolize a variety of things, including gentleness, innocence, and God's people. Sheep are also a key part of many religions and mythologies, and since most of the past structures we've seen appear similar to churches or are churches, maybe the symbolism isn't too far off and is trying to tell us something. Clearly something otherworldly is involved, and it could be a greater power. And maybe I'm giving these stalking eyes the benefit of a doubt. These stalkers aren't bad. They could be good and are just timid? Who knows? Let's now move on to tape 14, which is an abandoned building. It almost appears like there was a lot of history from past occupants who lived in this building based on the many photographs and furniture. However, the place was left to decay and is extremely messy. Additionally, it was practically a maze with how many rooms, staircases, and hallways that the cameraman had to traverse through. It was pretty overwhelming, and random noises could be heard even when the cameraman was standing completely still. Speaking of which, when the cameraman left and was on a dirt road, there was a strange noise coming from the woods which provoked them to leave in a hurry. Once safe, they looked towards the moon, then down another road before showing off interesting plants and trees. Everything looks twisted, oddly uncanny, and just completely strange. The cameraman is outside, yet it doesn't seem normal, especially when they continue to find structures in the middle of nowhere. One of these structures had a long staircase, and it stretches pretty long. However, towards the end of the video, it becomes a lot harder to see the visuals. Regardless, the description says something interesting. Submission statement, no photos of Elizabeth's daughter was found. Leviathan said it would be here according to his notes. Follow-up required. This is interesting because we get told names, and who exactly is Elizabeth and Leviathan? No clue, but they have to be someone important and the cameraman is familiar with them. So let's keep them in the back of our minds, including Elizabeth's daughter. This also gives us a motivation for the cameraman. Besides documenting these locations, the cameraman is searching for someone. Sure, they're just searching for photos, but maybe there's a chance they're looking for the real person too. Who knows? With that being said, now moving on to tape 15, it opens in a field with a gigantic and peculiar machine that I believe is meant for construction or farming. It has a large saw, and honestly, it doesn't make sense to me. Regardless, the cameraman explores more of the area and even climbs high up, which, while exploring, I couldn't help but notice these odd red dots that are following them. It could just be lights that are coming from the machine. However, based on the stalking dots from previous videos, it could be something more. It could be glowing red eyes rather than glowing white eyes. As for the description, it reads, submission statement, no envelope found in lockbox, which means this video was kind of a fetch quest that the cameraman failed because the item wasn't there, or maybe it was stolen. Next video, tape 16, we see a castle or mansion in the middle of an open field, and we see the moon for a moment before the cameraman approaches the building. And while approaching the building, unexpectedly, a distant voice could be heard screaming out. However, I couldn't couldn't quite pick up what was being said. Their screams had a bit of an echo, and it either sounded like they're panicking or they're just calling out to someone. It's a bit odd and honestly disturbing, but the cameraman doesn't seem too alarmed by this. Sure, they're keeping an eye on their surroundings, but it's not stopping them from exploring the area. And the description confirms that these screams were auditory disturbances, but no follow-up is required. By the way, this tape is arguably the most unsettling in the series, at least in my opinion. I constantly felt like something was about to jump out at the viewer, and I was a few steps away from having a heart attack. But my greatest fear is the unknown, and because of how mysterious and strange those yells were, of course I would feel unsettled. Speaking of unsettling, tape 17, we see multiple trees with toys hanging on them for some odd reason. After this, we see familiar clips from previous videos before showing a person standing in an open field. Speaking of which, this image actually flashed on screen earlier, but moving on, the cameraman soon explores an abandoned building which could be a hospital or asylum. Wherever it is, bright eyes followed them from the windows and around the corners, and on the walls were noticeable color-coded arrows pointing the cameraman in random directions. And honestly, most of the time it felt like the cameraman was running away or avoiding something as they explored the building. But eventually, they ended up outside in the rain and walked for a while until they arrived at a new location, which I think is a chapel in the forest. It honestly looks like it's in ruin, and the cameraman doesn't stay for long, and in the conclusion they look up towards the moon, which has a noticeable star nearby, which is interesting because there usually isn't any stars in the sky, but there is the one. Woo! Maybe it's not a star, who knows? As for the description, it reads, submission statement, visual disturbances detected. She wanted me to see her old room at the testing facility. Without the arrows there would be no chance of returning. Endless backroom. Follow-up may not be possible. Now this is a fascinating statement. The words testing facility likely implies that there were some experiments that likely involved people, and it's most definitely connected to the building that we were just exploring, and maybe it has something to do with those bright eyes too. As for the word backrooms, they can usually be connected to liminal spaces that are difficult to escape from. But our cameraman was lucky in this case, and they don't have to worry about returning because, well, it's not really a possibility according to the description. As for who exactly is she, we only have two options, Elizabeth and Elizabeth's daughter. And my hunch is the daughter for some reason. But anyways, moving on to tape 18. At first it seemed like nothing, just exploring another ruined building until we abruptly switched to a clip of a dark area with lightning being the only thing that can illuminate the surroundings. And at the top of a building was a mysterious dark figure that soon hid away once everything turned dark. As for the description, it reads, was followed, which might be referring to the dark entity that we just saw. How nice and scary. Now tape 19. First we see gloomy black and white footage of trees in the sky, which brightened and dimmed a few times before moving on to a scene of a peculiar pyramid-like structure in the middle of nowhere. The cameraman then goes into the forest and finds another structure but with statues. However, the cameraman doesn't stay long and approaches a castle-like mansion building instead. They explore inside and the audio is very loud, windy, and kind of staticky. Additionally, people in the comment section said that there was a mysterious dark figure spotted at the top of somewhere. However, I couldn't see them, so yeah. As for the description, it states that there weren't any disturbances and that the location was not documented in the notes. Great. Now the final tape in the series as of today, tape 20. The cameraman approaches a ruined chapel which has a mansion close by that our cameraman soon goes on to investigate, and to be honest, the layout of the building confused me so much, but whatever. And maybe it's my eyes tricking me, but sometimes it seems like the footage becomes a bit staticky at moments. The same can be said about the audio when it becomes glitchy. Speaking of which, the cameraman found themselves in a random location in the building, and the recording turned glitchy red for a moment before the cameraman gasped and turned away to run. Once outside, they kept moving until they found a couple of new places, some that are more ruined than others, and the audio continues to act up during these explorations. The video then ends with a view of a chapel and the description reads, cabinets was already gone through, no envelope. How alarming. Now this might be the temporary end of the series on YouTube, however there's a TikTok which has some interesting descriptions too. I won't go through all the TikToks, however I will say that the person posting the videos mentioned how they're the only person around and that everyone is missing. They also mentioned a castle in the sky, and they seem to have noticed the eyes that are following them, including a dark mysterious entity. They also mentioned a man who lives in the castle in the sky. It's kind of confusing but interesting stuff. There's also an Instagram and Twitter account, but I refuse to make an Instagram account, so let's just focus on the Twitter account. There's a lot of cool photos, some of which have people in them, and there's links to the videos that we just watched. Cool. Let's now move on to the conclusion. Conclusion. Clearly, the series focuses on ambience and provoking the feeling of paranoia and isolation. However, it's not just a series about some person investigating abandoned locations for fun, which I'm positive these are actual real-life places. I don't think this is CGI or anything. Anyways, remember in the beginning when I mentioned a CIA document and specifically a connection to a project? The project I'm talking about is Project Stargate, which if you don't know what that is a project that investigates the potential for psychic phenomenons, specifically a project with the goal to unlock the ability to see events, sites, or information location from great distances, I think. And the document also mentions the possibility of 3 universes. However, I don't want to do extra homework, so don't expect a lengthy explanation. Sorry. Anyways, the cameraman is likely an agent connected to the CIA or a top secret organization, and their task is to explore these strange locations. And these locations are obviously paranormal, or they are glimpses into different universes, which require the cameraman, agent person to document visuals and audio disturbances, and to even make contact with these things if needed. However, I don't believe these tapes are original documentation from Project Stargate when it was happening in the past. I believe that this secret organization decided to revisit the project many years later, and these tapes are closer to the present day rather than being old footage. I believe this because the footage doesn't exactly scream out old bad camera quality videos, you know? With that being said, the agent isn't just recording these locations as their only task. They're also looking for something. They're looking for an envelope and potentially a missing daughter or a photo of the daughter. Why? Maybe the organization discovered a way to send a person into a separate universe, however getting them back is the hard part, or our universe discovered a way to communicate with a different universe and we're trying to make contact by using something physical like an envelope and a photo. Maybe. I'm pretty much throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something sticks. And if I want to go extra crazy with my theories, maybe this Elizabeth person lost their daughter in our universe and they want to steal their daughter from a different universe. Haha, that's a half joke. I don't really believe that because again, they mentioned specifically a photo, they didn't mention a physical person. So, Anyways, different universes. Maybe these locations are anchor points where it's easier to get exposed to other universes, but if that's not the case, then maybe these are test locations to test the Stargate phenomenon that allows far-out locations to be spied on, and that's what these stalking eyes are. These glowing eyes that we've been seeing could be test subjects that succeeded in peeking into different locations. Maybe, unless they're just entities from separate universes. Gosh, this is confusing! Now moving on to the TikToks. The poster seems a little different compared to the one on YouTube, right? The TikToker is more confused and curious about the lack of people around them, while the YouTuber is serious about their work and straight to the point with their statements. So this could be an example of an alternate universe. The TikToker somehow ended up in a universe with no people, but instead just strange entities. Maybe. I'm not confident with this idea, but, you know, it's what I'm sticking with because I have to learn to be more confident with my ideas. Actually, speaking of being in a different universe, let's say those eyes aren't other people testing the psychic phenomenon. Instead, maybe the secret agent is the test subject who is visiting the other universes, which could explain why they're so relatively calm and understanding of many of the strange things happening around them because they knew what they got themselves into. Luckily, whenever something strange and unexpected does happen, they still run away, so at least our secret agent friend isn't a complete idiot. The downside to this theory is that if our protagonist is somehow linking their mind and their vision to different locations, then how are they recording it on camera? So unless there's some random technology that I'm not aware of, I'm not too sure about this theory. Anyways, the castle in the sky visuals and an emphasis on looking towards the moon. I don't have any ideas on that, truthfully. I can only think of aliens and the fact that the sky lacks stars, excluding the one that we saw before. Maybe there's something in space that could cause a greater increase in psychic phenomenons? Potentially? Whenever you hear alien stories, the setting tends to usually be in a farm or in an open field, so maybe I'm not too far off with that assumption, so maybe aliens could be involved. This series is basically a tease. It gives us information, but it also holds back a lot of information. When creating theories, you end up with a bag of ideas, but you have no clue which is the correct one. So I'll just leave you all with the ideas that I just shared, and if you have any theories of your own, feel free to leave them in the comment section. And again, the channel is Briscoe Park. Go check them out if you want to see the videos for yourself, because experiencing them is a different ballpark compared to having someone explain them to you. Obviously, go check them out. With that being said, as always, my name is Estrella. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do that funny little notification thing, maybe follow my other social medias, leave a comment, and I better not catch you dying on me. Goodbye!